Magnus Rothwell and Celeste Rothwell had it all: wealth, power, and a picture-perfect marriage. But behind the shimmering facade of their billionaire lifestyle, secrets festered. When Celeste, 6 months pregnant and growing suspicious of Magnus's late-night business trips, decides to investigate, she uncovers a betrayal far more sinister than just an affair. The other woman, Isla Vance, isn't just a mistress, she's a threat. And by the time Celeste realizes the danger, it's too late. Now, with a dead private investigator, a chilling warning, and bullets flying, Magnus and Celeste are no longer fighting for their marriage. They're fighting for their lives. Magnus Rothwell lived a life most could only dream of. As the CEO of Rothwell Global Investments, he had built an empire from the ground up, turning himself into one of the most influential billionaires in the country. His days were spent in high-rise boardrooms, closing million-dollar deals, and his nights were filled with elite social gatherings where he and his wife, Celeste, were the picture of perfection. Their love story had been one of admiration and envy, a fairy tale that captivated those who followed them in the media. But fairy tales were just that, stories. And beneath the surface, cracks had begun to form. Celeste Rothwell was 6 months, pregnant. A moment in her life she had longed for, yet something about it felt incomplete. Magnus had changed in ways she couldn't quite articulate. His affection, once unwavering and constant, now felt forced, like a performance rehearsed for an audience she couldn't see. He still sent extravagant gifts, still made sure she had everything she needed, yet his presence was fleeting. His touch lacked warmth, his kisses were hurried, and his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, seemed to be elsewhere. At first, she convinced herself it was stress. Running a billion-dollar empire came with responsibilities and pressures she couldn't begin to understand. The financial world was ruthless, and with the company expanding overseas, Magnus had been traveling more than ever. Late-night phone, calls, sudden trips, and last-minute cancellations became routine. She told herself it was temporary, that once things settled, he would return to her, to their growing family. But doubt was a seed that, once planted, took root quickly. It started with the little things. His phone, always within reach, now never left his side. He had set up a new passcode, something he never bothered with before. When she asked him about it, he had laughed it off, saying it was just a precaution against security threats. She wanted to believe him, but then there was the scent. One evening, as she was putting away his dry-cleaned shirts, she caught a faint but distinct perfume that wasn't hers. It was floral, unfamiliar, and sent an immediate chill through her. She buried the thought, telling herself she was being paranoid. But paranoia quickly turned into suspicion. Days passed, and Magnus became even more distant. Business trips extended without explanation, and when he returned, he seemed preoccupied. The man who once traced circles on her back as they lay in bed now faced the opposite direction, claiming exhaustion. Celeste tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in her gut, but her mind refused to rest. The final blow came one evening when Magnus was in the shower, and his phone vibrated on the nightstand. She wasn't the type to invade privacy, but something inside her pushed her forward. She glanced at the screen. A message flashed across from an unknown number. "Miss you already. Can't wait to see you again." Her breath caught in her throat. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. She stared at the words, her vision blurring. Her hands trembled as she placed the phone back exactly as it was, stepping away as if it burned her. When Magnus emerged minutes later, towel wrapped around his waist, he greeted her with a casual smile, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. That night, Celeste lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might wake him. She could no longer ignore the truth. Her husband, the man she had trusted and loved, was hiding something, and she was going to find out exactly what it was. Celeste woke up the next morning with a single thought consuming her mind. She needed proof. A part of her still hoped she was wrong, that the message on Magnus's phone had been misinterpreted, that it was some innocent conversation she had blown out of proportion. But deep down, she knew better. Magnus was keeping secrets, and secrets had a way of unraveling even the strongest of marriages. She couldn't confront him without evidence. Magnus was a master of words, a man who built his empire through persuasion and charm. He would find a way to twist her concerns, make her feel foolish for even suspecting him. If she wanted answers, she had to find them herself, and she knew exactly who could help. Victor Langley had a reputation for uncovering the truth, no matter how well it was hidden. A former detective turned private investigator, he had built a career exposing corruption, fraud, and affairs among the city's elite. Celeste had heard his name whispered in hushed conversations at charity galas. He was the man people called when they wanted the truth, no matter how ugly it was. She met Victor in a discreet cafe on the outskirts of the Har city, her hands gripping a cup of tea she had no intention of drinking. He was a man of few words, his sharp eyes studying her as she explained her suspicions. When she finished, he simply nodded and assured her he would find out the truth. There was no judgment in his expression, only a quiet determination that gave her hope. Days passed with agonizing slowness. Magnus was away on another business trip, and Celeste found herself pacing the halls of their mansion, replaying every interaction, every excuse, every late-night call in her mind. She had always prided herself on being a strong woman, someone who refused to be seen as just a billionaire's wife. And yet, here she was, waiting for a stranger to confirm whether her marriage was a lie. The call came at dusk. Victor's voice was calm, but the words he spoke shattered any lingering doubt she had. Magnus wasn't just seeing someone. He had been careful, meticulous even, but not careful enough. Victor had tracked him to an upscale hotel, a place known for its discretion, where he had checked in under an alias. The woman he was meeting was Isla Vance, a name Celeste had never heard before, but would never forget. Victor had obtained photos, Magnus entering the hotel lobby, Isla arriving moments later. Magnus handing over his credit card at the front desk, his posture relaxed, completely unaware that he was being watched. The final picture was the one that broke her. Magnus and Isla in the elevator, standing too close, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that left no room for doubt. Celeste stared at the images, her breath shallow. The proof was undeniable. Her husband, the man she had built a life with, was cheating on her. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow, but as the initial shock wore off, it was replaced by something stronger. She wasn't going to cry in the shadows or let Magnus dictate how this ended. She had a choice. She could wait for him to return, confront him in their home, demand an explanation, or she could take matters into her own hands. Magnus thought he was untouchable, that his secrets were safe. He had no idea that Celeste had just become his worst nightmare. As she gripped the photos tighter, a plan formed in her mind. She was going to catch him in the act, and this time he wouldn't be able to lie his way out of it. Celeste boarded the flight to New York with her heart pounding in her chest. Magnus had told her he would be away for 3 days on an important business trip, a meeting with international investors that required his full attention, but she knew the truth. He wasn't spending his nights preparing financial reports or negotiating deals. He was spending them with Isla Vance. The idea of confronting him in public had crossed her mind, but that wasn't enough. She needed undeniable proof, something he couldn't talk his way out of. She had already secured a room at the same hotel where Victor had tracked him before. If Magnus had any suspicions that she was on to him, he didn't show it. His last message to her was simple and cold. Flight delayed. We'll call later. He hadn't called. When the plane landed, she wasted no time. She checked into the hotel under her own name, wanting there to be no mistake about her presence. The receptionist smiled at her, oblivious to the storm raging inside. As she rode the elevator up, she gripped her purse tightly, her hands trembling. Victor had provided her with the details. Magnus had checked into a suite on the 22nd floor. A simple swipe of a key card, obtained through discreet channels, would get her inside. She didn't know what she would find. Part of her still clung to the hope that there was some mistake, that she would open the door and see nothing more than an empty room. But deep down, she knew better. The hallway was silent, the only sound the distant hum of hotel staff moving through other floors. She reached the door and hesitated for just a moment, listening for any sign of movement inside. Then, taking a deep breath, she slid the key card through the lock. The soft beep was deafening in the quiet corridor. The door swung open, and the scene before her confirmed her worst fears. Magnus was there, his shirt half unbuttoned, his tie loosened. Isla was draped across the bed, a silk robe barely covering her. A bottle of wine sat on the table, 2 glasses half full. The intimacy of it all made Celeste's stomach turn. For a moment, no one moved. Magnus froze, his expression shifting from confusion to pure panic. Isla, caught off guard, pulled the robe tighter around her body, as if that could undo what Celeste had already seen. The room reeked of betrayal, of a secret that had been exposed far too suddenly. Celeste didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, staring at her husband, the man who had promised to love her, who had vowed to be by her side as they built a future together. He had thrown it all away for this, for her. Magnus scrambled to say something, his mouth opening and closing like a man struggling for air, but there was nothing he could say that would fix this. Celeste had seen enough. She turned on her heel and walked out, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. As she reached the elevator, she felt the weight of what had just happened settle in. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Magnus had no idea what he had just unleashed. Celeste sat in the back of a black car, staring blankly out the window as the city lights blurred past. The confrontation had been quick, almost surreal, but the image of Magnus and Isla in that hotel room burned in her mind. She had walked away, without a word, but the silence did not mean surrender. Her next steps would determine everything. Back at her own hotel, she locked the door behind her and sank onto the bed, gripping her phone. Victor had been right. Every suspicion, every gut feeling, she had ignored them for too long. She pulled up the photos Victor had sent her, scrolling through them one last time. Magnus entering the hotel. Isla following minutes later, the two of them together in the elevator. And now she had seen it with her own eyes. She had options. Divorce was the obvious one. With Magnus's wealth and public image, this scandal could ruin him if handled correctly. But something deeper gnawed at her, a lingering unease that she couldn't shake. It wasn't just Magnus's affair that disturbed her. It was Isla. Victor had done some research on the woman, but the details were oddly scarce. Isla Vance had appeared in social circles seemingly out of nowhere, always seen, with powerful men but never leaving behind any real trace. No social media, no steady job, no family ties. Just whispers, rumors, and one disturbing pattern. Every man she had been linked to had suffered a scandal, a financial downfall, or in some cases, worse. Celeste exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around her phone. Magnus had always been reckless in business, pushing boundaries and making enemies, but he was never careless in his personal life. Yet here he was, tangled up with a woman who seemed to bring destruction wherever she went. She called Victor, needing more information, but the line went to voicemail. That was strange. He had been quick to answer her before. She tried again. Nothing. A sense of unease crawled up her spine. The next morning, the headlines shattered any hope of this being a simple affair. Private investigator found dead in new York hotel room, possible overdose. The words barely registered at first. Then they hit her like a truck. Victor was dead. Celeste's fingers shook as she scrolled through the article. The report stated that he had been found in his hotel room, an apparent victim of a drug overdose. But she knew Victor. He was meticulous, calculated. He wasn't the type to take risks, and he certainly wasn't the type to overdose. Her thoughts raced. Victor had been investigating Isla. He had been digging into her past, following her movements. And now he was gone. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. She looked back at the last text he had sent her the night before. There's something off about her. I'll explain tomorrow. But tomorrow had never come. A knock on her door made her jump. She hesitated, her pulse hammering. When she finally opened it, she was met with the cold, calculating stare of a woman she had only seen in photographs. Isla Vance. Dressed in all black, Isla leaned against the doorframe, her lips curling into a knowing smile. "You should be careful, Celeste," she said softly, her voice calm, almost amused. "Some things are better left alone." Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway. Celeste stood frozen, gripping the door handle, so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wasn't dealing with just a mistress. She was dealing with something much, much worse. Celeste's mind raced as she shut the door, locking it immediately. Isla Vance had just stood outside her hotel room, warning her in a way that sent ice through her veins. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. Magnus had entangled himself with someone dangerous, someone who operated in the shadows, and now Celeste was in the middle of it. She paced the room, trying to make sense of it all. Victor was dead. He had been investigating Isla, and now he was gone under suspicious circumstances. Magnus had fallen into Isla's trap, just like the other men before him, and Celeste had no doubt that whatever was coming next would be far worse than just a ruined marriage. Her phone buzzed, and she nearly dropped it. A message flashed on the screen. "Unknown number. Go home. Forget this ever happened." Her stomach twisted. She swallowed hard and turned off her phone. There was no going back now. Whatever Isla was involved in, it had already cost one life. Celeste wasn't going to let it take hers. She needed to get out of the hotel. Staying in one place was too dangerous. Isla had found her too easily. Celeste packed a small bag, stuffing the evidence Victor had collected into an inner pocket. Those photos were now the only proof of Magnus's affair, and possibly the only key to understanding what Isla truly was. She slipped out through the service elevator, keeping her head down as she moved through the lobby. The city felt different now, colder, as if unseen eyes were watching her. She couldn't go home, not yet. Magnus would be expecting her to either come back and demand answers or disappear quietly. She wasn't going to do either. Instead, she found herself in a small cafe near the river, far from the luxury hotels and high-end restaurants she and Magnus had once frequented. She needed time to think, to plan her next move. She opened her laptop and began searching for any information she could find about Isla. As she suspected, there was almost nothing. No past addresses, no official records beyond a few scattered mentions in gossip columns. It was as if Isla Vance had been created out of thin air. But there was something, an old article buried deep in the archives of a business journal. It was about a hedge fund CEO named Grant Holloway who had mysteriously disappeared 5 years ago. The last person seen with him? Isla Vance. There were no charges, no formal investigation, but the implication was clear. Grant Holloway had vanished, and Isla had moved on to her next target. Celeste's blood ran cold. If Isla had done this before, Magnus could be next. Her thoughts were interrupted by another message. This time, it wasn't from an unknown number. It was from Magnus. "We need to talk." Now. For a long moment, she debated ignoring it. But she needed answers, and Magnus was the only one who could give them to her. She agreed to meet him in a private parking garage beneath one of his office buildings. When she arrived, Magnus was already there, pacing next to his car. He looked shaken, not like the confident man who had built an empire. "Celeste, you don't understand," he said as soon as she stepped out of her car. "She's dangerous." Celeste crossed her arms. "I know." Magnus ran a hand through his hair. "She's not who she says she is. I tried to end things, but she—" He hesitated. "She made it clear that wouldn't be an option." Celeste took a step closer. "Then tell me everything, because Victor is dead, and if you're not careful, you might be next." Magnus's face paled. Before he could speak, the sound of tires screeching echoed through the garage. A black SUV sped toward them, headlights cutting through the dim light. Celeste grabbed Magnus's arm. "Run!" They barely made it behind a concrete pillar before gunshots rang out. The SUV didn't stop. It sped past them, disappearing into the night. Magnus was breathing heavily, his hands shaking. Celeste looked at him, realization dawning. Isla wasn't just a mistress, she was a predator, and now both of them were her prey.